The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual guests. If you're a sensitive snowflake that may get easily offended, then turn this off immediately. If you want to hear the real truth about the gun culture, then stick around. This is the Armed Citizen Podcast.
What is going on, my Ghost Squad? Welcome to the Armed Citizen Podcast live. We are live as always on YouTube. I believe this is episode number 136. So thank you for always watching. If you're out there live, we don't know you're out there unless you say something in the chat. So say hello. If you're new to the chat, new to the channel, welcome. We hope we don't make you any dumber. I can't guarantee it, but we try not to make you any dumber. We're not the smartest people here, at least I'm not, but we like to have a good time. But say hello, welcome. Hopefully we can have fun, a little entertainment, education, and all of that side of stuff. If you're watching a replay or listening in podcast form, you can always utilize a comment section. Let us know where you're from if you're new. If you have a question for our guests, then make sure you leave those in the comment section below, and we'll make sure we get those answered for you as well. Before we introduce everybody, let's go ahead and say hello while we give the notifications time to get out there. Let's say hello to everybody that's out there in the chat. Looks like Nighthawk and Gun-Loving Grandpa have been out there having a discussion. They both live here in Arkansas, and hopefully we're going to get to shoot once all the craziness subsides and get to their range a little bit. So we're having a little discussion about that. But welcome. We've got real quick before we do get going, I want to bring this one up. We did have, before the show starts, mandatory carry with a $10 super chat. Thank you very much. But he said, just in case my internet goes out, P.S. Thank you, Mr. Prince. I was ready to walk away from the community. So you've already touched someone and you haven't even been around yet on the show yet. But no, thank you, mandatory carry. I appreciate you very much. I wanted to throw that out there. But let's see who else is out there for us out there in the YouTube internet. We've got Jacob S. He said, "What's up, gang?" John Pinkney from Occupied Territory, Northern Virginia. There you go. Rod and Shelly Gates, our friends at the Gun Cleaners. Go check them out if you guys are looking for awesome gun cleaning. That's what I used to clean all my guns. Go check out the Gun Cleaners. They're all over social media, guncleaners.com. Go check them out. Good people, good product, by the way. Thank you, Rod. Good seeing you, buddy. That's not a plug. That's not a paid plug. That's just true. I use their stuff, and they're very, very good people. So go check them out as well. You've got Joe Ziola's out there. You've got Calaveras 32 Special. He says, this show burns brain cells, so if anyone who joins, that's why he loves it. Well, we appreciate you. 10mm JHP. Justice Prince, thank you for everything you do. Justice Prince. Is that? We'll get into that a little bit later, I guess. Mandatory Carry says he's out there for now. Gizzard Gary's out there. The Poor Conservative. Let's see here. Riley Stevenson's out there. 10X Shooters. Hold My Gun. That's Sarah Joy Albrecht, our homegirl out there. We got a lot more people out there like skins. Make sure you say hello. We'll give you a shout out if we can. You can also text questions. If you want to ask us questions, put us in there. You can tag any of us in here. You can also text them to our hotline, 530-364-4678. And Jacob says, what are the pros and cons of open carrying versus concealed carry? We might get to that later, but right now we're going to bring in our guests. Helping us out, kind of playing producer for us tonight, our good friend from the great state of Texas. Got the tactical virus himself. What's up, Clover? How you doing, buddy?
Hey, man. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. And our special guest of the night, you guys probably have seen his face. You probably, if you're into the two-way world at all, you've probably heard his name. But we have from Pennsylvania, we have Second Amendment attorney Joshua Prince. What's going on, Joshua? Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me, Trey.
Yeah, no worries. I know that everyone's kind of been weird, but I know that you haven't stopped working. You're probably as busy as ever. So can you kind of tell people, just to start out, what's kind of like the day in the life of a Second Amendment attorney?
Well, I keep hoping to get quarantined so that I can have some time off and to be able to relax for a little bit. But things have been intense with everything going on with COVID. Obviously, I do areas of law beyond just simply firearms law, so I handle a lot of constitutional law issues. I've taken some emergency applications up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We might get some time to chat about some of those. And, in relation to normal day, it really varies. I handle all facets of firearms law at the state and federal level. So I have individuals who get erroneously denied, whether it's by FBI or by the Pennsylvania State Police. I also do estate planning, so gun trusts, wills, such like that. It's particular for firearms. We also handle all sorts of issues for gun clubs, gun ranges. We do specialized bylaws for them to deal with unique issues of being a gun club. A lot of clubs never consider the fact that right before they're about to be sued, usually the person that's going to sue them joins and becomes a member. And clubs have a tendency to talk about their strategy for any litigation during their general membership meetings. So there's things that we do in bylaws to try and give clubs additional protections if, God forbid, something like that happens. We do a lot of waivers that can be used by gun clubs, gun ranges, as well as instructors. And then we also represent federal firearms licensees, and that can be issues with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives that, yes, should be a corner store, and also other issues that they may have. It could be contractual issues with their customers. I also get the great opportunity to work with phenomenal partners in the industry like Hold My Guns, Sarah Albrecht. I think she's watching. Phenomenal organization, really trying to help those who are in need, have a ability to take their firearms voluntarily and have them held at a federal firearms licensee for a limited period of time. So really, if it involves a firearm, with the one exception of patents, we handle it.
Yep. Now, I want to kind of get your background as far as how you got into specific two-way law. But I know that, you're a range safety officer. And from what I understand, you've got a pretty interesting collection of firearms yourself. But, can I tell the people, how does one, were you always wanting to be involved in two-way law, or how did that come about?
So really, even today, a lot of law schools in that don't teach the Second Amendment. It's rare. I think there's only about 2 or 3 law schools across the United States that even have a class that touches on the Second Amendment. And really what had occurred was when I was in law school, I had an elder law professor who was an adjunct professor. He had an elder law blog that was considered in the top 5% across the United States. And he had offered to the class that if they wanted to write a blog article for his blog, he would give 10% of their grade for that blog. So I went up to him after class and I said, I have a little bit of an unusual idea. And he says, well, what's that? I said, well, I'd like to write about Grandpop's machine gun in the trunk. I said, as our veterans are dying off, they're going to administer their estates. They're finding a Thompson machine gun or some type of firearm in the estate. They don't know what to do with it. They don't even know what it is. And he's like, yeah, I don't know about that. And I said, no, I think this is a real issue. And he says, I'll tell you what, write the article, bring it to me, we'll review it, and we'll go from there. So I did that, ended up talking about barrel lengths for short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, things like that. He looks at it and he says, I'm an estate practitioner handling estate issues for over 30 years, and I've never once known to measure the barrel length of a firearm. He says, I never knew that. So he ends up publishing the blog, and it goes viral across the U.S. There's all these estate practitioners writing in saying, this information just isn't out there. We don't know about it. I think I ended up writing about a total of 3 blogs for his blog. And then we started getting local bar associations that actually asked me to come in and present on firearms law issues for practicing attorneys. So that's how it kind of started. And once I graduated law school, then I had the Pennsylvania Bar Institute asking me to come and present to attorneys. And it just took off from there. My father, I'm a 4th generation attorney, and I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to join up with my father's firm upon graduating from law school. And I told him I wanted to do firearms law. And he's like, yeah, okay, you can go ahead and do that, whatever that is. But you're also going to be doing, workers' compensation, Social Security disability work, family law, criminal law. And I got so busy with doing the firearms law within a year and a half that's all I ended up was doing at that point, as well as some other constitutional issues that piqued my interest. And basically, that's all I've been doing now. I've been practicing law for 11 years, and all I do is just firearms law issues and other constitutional issues at the state and federal level. And I didn't mention it earlier, I am admitted to practice both in Pennsylvania and Maryland, so state law issues I handle in both those states, and federal issues I handle across the U.S. I'm admitted to a number of U.S. district courts, circuit courts of appeal, and I am admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court as well, and I've practiced before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Now, that's interesting because I don't think a lot of people understand, and they probably wouldn't because there'd be no really reason to do it, but people don't understand when you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's a different type of trial, a different type of presentation. Can you just briefly touch on that? Because I think that'd be interesting to people to hear.
Sure. It's very different than any court. And the interesting aspect is they're very behind the game when it comes to technology. In fact, this week, we actually just heard that for the first time in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court, this upcoming month, they're actually going to have oral arguments over the telephone. They're not even at the point of having Zoom, Skype, or other, virtual type oral arguments. It's going to be over the telephone. Now, I got to interject something because this just happened today. So I have a federal firearms licensee that got a notice of revocation. This was before COVID happened. And we were scheduled to go and have the hearing in Philadelphia before the director of industry operations about 3 weeks ago now, right when coronavirus started coming about. I'm actually on my way there. They cancel it. Then they say they want to do a telephonic conference. So today we actually had the telephonic conference regarding that meeting. So ATF had 3 attorneys on the phone, the director of industry operations, and 2 IOIs, and then there was myself and my client.
Right.
That was the worst telephonic conference I've ever had. I mean, just 4 attorneys on a telephone call, all trying to speak at the same time. Yeah, it doesn't work. God bless the U.S. Supreme Court. I have no idea how these oral arguments are going to go because anymore, really, attorneys don't do that much arguing in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court justices basically use the attorneys to bounce questions off towards other justices and make remarks and rebukes to other justices. So in some regards, it's weird. The other thing is, everyone always hears that the courts are always open to everyone. And unfortunately, that's not my experience with the Supreme Court. Not that it was ever designed to hear every case, and they couldn't. But where I'm coming from is they have a special font that you must use in any brief submitted to them. There's only 4 or 5 entities in the United States that have this font. So generally, when you're talking about filing a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court, you're looking at spending $20,000 just for the printing, not for my time to draft it, just to pay the printer to print it in the font and the way in which the U.S. Supreme Court wants it. And then you can have multiple briefs. If you're the appellant, you could be filing a reply brief. And so it gets very, very expensive when you're litigating in front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, because you're not talking about just the format of your briefs. Now you're talking about a specific font. That's just, it blows my mind. Before we start kind of going into questions and all that, Clover, I want to bring Clover in. Clover, do you have anything that you want to ask or bring up right off the bat?
Yeah, when you brought up the font, it's, I don't know, interject a thought here, and then he can kind of follow up on it if you want. But, that's what a lot of people, I think, don't realize and get discouraged quite often when we see these suits take place. And first of all, they don't understand the process that everything has to go through, right? It's not just that you show up in court one day and they hear it, and then all the intricate details like the font and things have to be laid out in a certain order in a certain way. And then when a court kicks something back because of that reason, then a lot of folks in our camp like to get discouraged over that. And it's a matter of procedure, and we shouldn't be getting discouraged because something got screwed up with the procedure, correct?
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I have to admit, anytime the U.S. government screws up, it's one of those moments, when the court has to issue a rebuke and say, you couldn't follow these simple local rules that we have that are written, and you're the U.S. government, and you can't do that with all your DOJ attorneys, U.S. attorneys, ATF, FBI attorneys. So we have some fun with it. But you're right. Sometimes individuals do get a little bit overly worked up about it. But I have to admit, I do, enjoy when the government screws some things up.
To follow up on that, I guess with a question, do you see as an attorney, do you see a need for all of that? I mean, for things to be a specific font and just some of the crazy procedure that has to go on? Is there actually a need for that, or could it be simplified?
I think it could be simplified, but it could also be my generation. So I am one where I love everything electronic. I wouldn't touch paper unless I absolutely needed to. I know, obviously, with the federal judiciary, that isn't always the case because they can stay on until they're either removed by impeachment or they decide to retire. And there have been federal district judges over 100 years of age still on the bench. So sometimes we joke around like 14-point font. You have to be blind as a bat, to need that size. And in fact, here in Pennsylvania, about 2 years ago, the Commonwealth Court and the appellate courts here in PA changed the font requirements to 14-point font. And one of the Commonwealth Court judges said, there's something wrong here in PA that we're requiring attorneys to print in this size font. If a judge can't read it and our judges are forced to retire now at 75, there's something wrong here. Also, with some of the circuit courts, they have all these special colors for your brief so the cover page has to be red if you're the appellant, blue if you're the appellee, green if you're the amicus, gray if it's a reply brief, tan if it's a sir reply brief. And I'm like, dude, you can't tell me these judges remember these colors. Like, they're looking at the cover and it says reply brief. Okay, I got the reply brief. I know what's here.
They're laughing. So they're in the background going, these guys are idiots.
Yeah, so it's like, literally the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is one of the federal circuit courts that I am in front of quite frequently, they have a cheat sheet that is 2 pages long in 8-point font so that you can try and remember what their requirements are. That's the cheat sheet. That's not the local rules. There's something wrong in my mind when that's where we're at.
Absolutely.
So hopefully that kind of answers your question. Yes, I think there's a lot of issues there that could be streamlined, and I think we could make things a lot more simplified. And maybe as we enter this more technological age, maybe we'll see some of those requirements go away.
Looks like you've got a fanboy out there. Paul Santora says, Joshua Prince is the smartest, hardest working attorney in the world. He's also an extremely down-to-earth guy. If it weren't for his tireless efforts and brilliant legal mind, we would be just like New Jersey. So he must be a constituent there in Pennsylvania. And I'm sure the check's in the mail, right?
I don't know if my head's going to fit through the door after that door. My God. Oh, well.
Now, I want to bring up something that just happened yesterday. The DOJ's out there talking about drive-through gun sales. Is this something, what are your initial takes on this?
So I wanted to strangle whoever asked ATF for the determination, to be blunt, because It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen someone ask ATF. Because if someone came to me and asked me, Josh, can I do this? I'd say, is it on your premise? Yes? Okay. Statutory law says that's your premise. You can do a sale from it. Now, to specifically ask about these drive-up windows, I can only imagine the new legislation that some in Congress are going to dream up because of ATF's response. I don't see why it was necessary. ATF does not have any legal authority to override statutory law. The most they can do is, if there was merely a regulation, there is an emergency provision where, for good cause shown, they could override a regulation, which is something they alone enacted. But in this case, we're talking about statutory law. So what exactly did they expect ATF to come back and tell them? Oh, we're just going to ignore statutory law. Now, they did that with bump stocks, but that's a different issue. But, you know, it made absolutely no sense. And now it's blown up across the U.S. about, you know, gun stores offering guns through drive-up windows. And I'm like, this is not going to be good for our industry. I can see the legislation being drafting already.
Yeah, they think that the gun show loophole, and they're going to, I mean, it's be thrown into this thing where, yeah, it's bad. I want to bring up something that happened in the last month that you're probably suing the governor or the political heads that be in Pennsylvania all the time. But the one that I heard about, which is when I kind of reached out to you a month or so ago, and I thought it was fascinating, is that you and Adam took on the governor of Pennsylvania to make sure that gun shops were counted as essential businesses. And initially he had ruled against it, but then over like a weekend, it was like on a Thursday, he ruled against it, but by like Saturday afternoon or something, it had come back. And I got something from Sarah that said, hey, this just happened. And I was like, oh, I got to get them on. But can you go through the process of what it's like to sue the governor or sue the government over being essential or non-essential? Because that's fascinating to me.
So, yeah, I love suing the government. I tend to be somewhat decent at it. I tend to win a good number of the cases, far more than I lose. I did end up losing this case to some degree. So, basically what it was when he initially issued the determination as to what constituted non-life sustaining businesses, sporting goods stores were included as non-essential. Now, under the federal codes, let me just call them, the NAICS or whatever it is, there is no specific code for federal firearms licensees. There are for manufacturers of firearms, but not for dealers of firearms. So the code doesn't match up with sporting goods. So we sued basically under something called the King Bench jurisdiction of the PA Supreme Court. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has the power to take up any action where there's of public concern immediately without you going through the lower courts. You basically petition them and say, this is an emergent type situation where we need you right today to weigh in on this matter. So Adam Kraut and I had prepared a petition. It was backed by Firearms Policy Coalition and Trop Gun Shop, a couple other individuals, also my law firm, because the governor actually said that law firms and legal services were non-essential. So we fought, yeah, get that, of course. Well, then there would be no one to fight his.
It's martial law at that point. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
So prepared a King's Bench application, filed with the PA Supreme Court, let the Supreme Court in the first sentence know that I was violating the governor's order by even preparing and filing it, because I have a duty of my ethical duty of care to the tribunal is to let the court know if I'm violating the law. I wanted the Supreme Court to know that I was violating the law. And so it was amazing because within 24 hours of filing the action, all of a sudden Governor Wolf had changed the life-sustaining provisions as it regards to legal practice. Because here in Pennsylvania, our Pennsylvania Constitution says only the PA Supreme Court can regulate attorneys. And so that was one of the arguments we had made, that governor overstepped his bounds. So anyway, we served as an emergency application. We requested an ex parte injunction because of the fact that the point in time we filed was Thursday at noon, I believe. and the order was to go into effect on Friday morning. And so we said we need an injunction right away. What was interesting is that Governor Wolf then delayed the enforcement of it until Monday morning. And at that point, the PA Supreme Court issued an order directing the governor to file an answer to our petition. So it was no longer ex parte. And for listeners who don't know, ex parte means that the court's only hearing from one side. They're not hearing both sides of the argument. It's only done in emergency situations, and it would at most have resulted in an order that would have been temporary only until the government had an opportunity to be heard and the court could make a more finalized determination. Anyway, what transpires is the court declines to exercise its king bench power in our case after the governor filed their answer. But there is a dissent issued by Justice Wecht, joined in by Justices Donahue and I'm forgetting who the other justice who joined in it was. But basically, Justice Wecht, and what's important for the listeners to be aware of, Justice Wecht's son at this point in time is suffering from COVID, and Justice Wecht has self-quarantined himself at his home with his child, and I assume also his spouse and such as that. Justice Wecht issues this dissent saying that he feels it's improper that the court didn't grant king bench jurisdiction to hear this case because of the Second Amendment issues at play, and that this is improper for a governor to restrict a constitutional right in this fashion, not providing any mechanism by which a firearm could be sold during this COVID issue. And so that was a phenomenal decision. And I think it's important to let the viewers know that Justice Wecht is a registered Democrat. He's, to my knowledge, always been a Democrat. And the two other justices who joined in are both Democrats. The two Republicans that we have on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, one of which is the Chief Justice.
Stayed quiet, huh?
Yeah. So that was really troubling. And not that these types of constitutional issues should come down to political, identities, but yet usually we do see in some regard that occurs. And I've been very, very impressed with decisions that Justice Wecht has issued. In fact, if we have time, I can talk about a different case, Commonwealth versus Hicks, that he issued a decision in. So in Commonwealth versus Hicks, it was a case that came up out of the Lehigh County Court of Common Pleas. Basically, Mr. Hicks was represented by the Lehigh County Public Defender's Office because he had no money. The situation was he was seen at a gas station. When he gets, it's a little bit confusing. Even the PA Supreme Court said they're not sure of what exactly had occurred from the trial testimony and the evidence, because apparently the videos weren't relayed up to the court. But either when Mr. Hicks gets out of the car, his shirt pulls up and you see a gun, or there's someone there that apparently Mr. Hicks knows. He shows the gun still in his waistband to him, not in a threatening manner, but like, hey, you check out my new weapon, and then proceeds into the store, purchases stuff, leaves, and is driving away when police stop him because City of Allentown videos had cameras had picked up on him and seen that he had this firearm. So the entire basis for the stop was that they saw this gun. And
from his video camera.
Yeah, and they then contend that he's DUI as well, even though they had no reasonable suspicion, probable cause that he was DUI until such time as allegedly they stopped him, pulled him out of the car. There was a whole confrontation. Anyway, the Court of Common Pleas, there's an application to basically suppress everything. That gets denied. It goes up to the Superior Court, and again, he's represented by the Public Defender's Office, and it's a bad briefing that gets filed. Like, I think they mentioned the Second Amendment, and that was one sentence and done. That and the Fourth Amendment, I don't even think they cited to the Fourth Amendment. I think they just said, talked about reasonable suspicion in broad strokes. And so it gets denied before the Superior Court. And then they appeal up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I'm horrified when the PA Supreme Court says they want to hear the case, because I'm thinking that the court's looking at ruling that this was sufficient probable cause even. And so once again, Firearms Policy Coalition and also Firearm Owners Against Crime had chipped in and supported me drafting an amicus brief. I reviewed all 50 states and the decisions that have been issued regarding whether it constitutes reasonable suspicion just because you see someone either openly with a firearm or a bulge that appears like a firearm, and then went through all the federal courts as well and compiled all of this into one brief. Believe it or not, even New Jersey had case law that it does not constitute reasonable suspicion merely because you see someone with a gun. And so I put it all together. We even gave the example that under the jurisprudence from the U.S. Supreme Court, you can't simply stop a vehicle to see if the person has a driver's license. It's no different here. Here in Pennsylvania, if you have a license to carry firearms, you could carry a concealed firearm. Open carry is a much more complex issue, and I'll just say here in PA, if you want to open carry, make sure you have a license to carry firearms so you don't get caught up in some of the minutia. But anyway, the PA Supreme Court, in a decision issued by Justice Wecht, a unanimous decision, comes down and says it does not constitute reasonable suspicion of criminal activity merely because you see someone with a firearm, whether it's open or concealed. And they actually used about 70% of the brief I wrote in their decision, and almost all the legal arguments, including that the fact that you can't stop someone who's driving a motor vehicle just to check to see if they have a license. They also made the same analogy as I had in our briefs, that you can't stop someone just to see if they have a license to carry. So it was a phenomenal decision. I think it was over like 50 pages that Justice Wecht issued. So again, that's why I say I've been really, really impressed. He does clearly have a very good understanding of both the Pennsylvania and U.S. constitutions, and I just continue to be impressed by his decisions. But getting back to suing Governor Wolf, as a result of that dissent, all of a sudden Governor Wolf changed the non-life sustaining list to include federal firearms licensees. That may have also had something to do with the fact that I was preparing a new case where an individual was both wanting to purchase a firearm and couldn't, and there was an FFL within 10 minutes willing to sell a firearm to that person and couldn't. And I kind of dropped that petition on the Attorney General, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's attorneys, and said, is this the next step? And I didn't get a reply. But quickly thereafter, federal firearms licensees became life essential, and there were more restrictions placed on them than other businesses, which I do have an issue with. But at some point, we do have to consider, how much resources are we going to spend, or utilize, I guess I should say, on issues, because there's just so much that's out there, and I do a lot. I like over 50% of my practice is pro bono. And
really, that's incredible. I think it's interesting you're talking about having more criteria that you would like to maybe go after, but at what point, especially in circumstances like this, at what point is a win a win? Is that something you had to measure? Is it, like you said, the resources, the time, and everything that's going on? Sometimes a win's a win, and let's just kind of take it for what it is. I want to bring Clover in. Clover, do you have anything that you want to bring? I know you like to argue, so I figured you might enjoy this.
Oh man, I've had many a day in small claims court being my own attorney, and I absolutely love it. I love researching and finding the right arguments and stuff like that. And that's sort of what the road I wanted to go down, because he had talked about the public defender there that, just kind of had, his paperwork and all that was horrible. As far as not necessarily 2A related, I guess, court cases that you've seen, but just in general, how often are the arguments not as well put together as they should be? And as far as some of the stuff you may have looked at historically on Second Amendment cases in particular, is that potentially some of the reasons those cases are lost?
So that's a very loaded question.
Pun intended.
I'm going to be blunt. My application that we filed with the PA Supreme Court, I thought I could have, if I had more time, I could have done a lot more with it with regards to Second Amendment arguments and that. But I was up against a deadline. If I was going to get it filed and give the court at least half of a day to review it, consider it, and potentially issue a temporary injunction, I had to get it filed. So sometimes we are up against those hard deadlines where we just have to make those tough decisions and say, this has got to be good enough, and either it's going to win or it's not. And at the end of the day, I knew even if I didn't win, all I was asking for was for the court to hear me out. Right. And if it granted King Bench jurisdiction, I would then have an opportunity to brief it more, and I'd have that time to do what I wanted to do with it. That being said, I do see a lot of mistakes made by especially a lot of attorneys who don't know what they're doing. They see a success that maybe I or another firearms attorney have, and then they just think, okay, everything's got to be good to go. So, for example, I won a case in the Middle District by the Chief Judge Connor there, regarding a second DUI, which triggered a misdemeanor of the first degree here in Pennsylvania. I was successful in having him rule that violated the Second Amendment as applied to Mr. Holloway. And what do we see next? We see an attorney filing an application, a Second Amendment as applied challenge for someone who's had 5 DUIs in a 6-year period. I'm like, dude, that's not how this happen. That's not how you make these arguments. Or in the mental health arena, I've been successful in both cases I brought in having the federal courts rule that a Section 302 commitment here in PA is not sufficient to trigger a federal disability. And what do you have? And I also have the only 2 Second Amendment as applied mental health challenge successes across the U.S. that I'm aware of, Keys and Yox. And what do you have? You have an attorney who then has someone who's not only been 302'd and 303'd, which they could be kept up to 25 days at that point, but 304'd, where they could have been kept up to 120 days more, and applying that they were only 304'd in the past 2 years. And it's a Second Amendment as applied challenge. And guess what? They lost. And now it sets that bad precedent. People, even attorneys, don't understand that you have to move that operant window very slowly. And so when you start taking these gigantic leaps, the courts, we can't handle that. And so, unfortunately, it does take a lot of time to litigate these cases in the federal courts. There's some things that we can do to try and make them a little bit quicker in some regards, but it also adds to the expense in litigating them. But unfortunately, we do have to give it that time, and we have to take that slow, methodical approach to these types of cases, especially when we're talking about prohibited persons and trying to get relief for them. When, I do believe, based on what our founding fathers intended, that, there was no idea of someone being prohibited for life. And in fact, another case I have pending right now before the Third Circuit involves a young lady who made a false statement on a tax return. As a result of that, she is federally prohibited for life from being able to purchase firearms and ammunition. Now, that is a felony. I knew that. I took time and considered, if there's ever going to be a successful Second Amendment as applied challenge what does my plaintiff look like? It's going to be female. It's going to be a non-violent offense. It's not going to be heinous in any regard. I don't know how you get a better scenario than someone who pled guilty to making a false statement on a tax return. And literally part of my argument to the Third Circuit was, if I remember correctly, our founding fathers did not pay a tax, took up arms because of a tax, and didn't believe their non-payment of that tax precluded them from taking up arms against the government. So it'll be interesting to see what the Third Circuit does there, but I am very particular in who my plaintiffs are. In that follow-up case that I was planning to file up against Governor Wolf, I had a female who doesn't own any firearms, is now concerned, has a child, wanted to protect herself during this pandemic, have an FFL that's within 10 minutes of her, willing to sell her a handgun, which we already know from DCV Heller is at the core of the Second Amendment. That is, the ability to protect oneself in one's home at the core. So when you take the time to really think those things through and willing to take time to find your proper plaintiffs, that's where you end up being successful with these cases.
Absolutely. I got a question for you, and it's not for me, so I can't take credit for it. It actually comes from Sarah. So yeah, get ready. But she sent me a text and she has a question. She basically, you're fighting with the governor, you're fighting with the Supreme Court for different stuff, and politicians in general. So with the election kind of coming up in November, from your point of view, from a legality point of view, what kind of traits or what kind of things are you looking for politicians to make you think that they're actually truly going to support the Second Amendment when it's up for election? Because I think that there are things that we're going to hear, but you work with politicians on a daily basis. You kind of know what is side talk and what's real talk. So what are you looking for when you make your decision on politicians when it comes to elections?
If it's someone who has already been in office, I want to see what their votes are, what matters they voted against us, what matters they voted in line with us. It's not just a Second Amendment issue to me. It's an all constitutional issue. I want to see where they stand on Fourth Amendment issues, First Amendment issues. I don't just, basically close my eyes to everything else. But I also don't take what they're telling me to my face to be the truth of the matter or the gospel. I always want to do my own research, see whether what they're telling me is supported by their past actions. And, there have been times where our politicians have been misled regarding what a bill does. And in fact, I'm thinking of about 2 years ago, there was a bill here in Pennsylvania, House Bill 2060, that all Republicans got behind, thinking it was related to domestic violence bill. Everyone, how could you come out against domestic violence? I am saying, look, there's a lot of issues here. You're stripping people of a constitutional right ex parte. They don't even get heard. And they were fed lies that wasn't the case. And they all voted in favor of it before they learned the fact that this wasn't the truth. They were also led lies that the Pennsylvania Sheriff's Association was in favor of this bill when they actually weren't. So there are a lot of things like that you have to go into it eyes wide open in relation to. And I try to blog about it. I try to put the information out there so people know, especially in advance. But it can be difficult, and there's no guarantees whatsoever. Like we said before, we have 2 Republicans on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, both of which, have made pro-Second Amendment statements, but yet nowhere to be found in the grant of the King bench jurisdiction. And they could have just simply issued a decision relative strictly to that. But again, they were nowhere to be found. So it's very, very difficult to give criteria because politicians will say whatever they need to say. And
yes, they will.
That's just the.
So I'm going to put out the link to the Firearms Industry Consulting Group out there for people. And the question I want to have is, you can practice in Pennsylvania, Maryland. You also have other things you can in certain ways practice a lot of the country. But if someone in Minnesota or Alabama or Colorado or Wisconsin, someone out there is listening and they have questions about, they feel like their rights are being infringed upon, whether it's Second Amendment, any of your civil rights, can they contact you, or who do they contact? At least find out maybe who they can work with in their area. Can they contact you guys at the Firearms Industry Consulting Group?
Absolutely. And if it's a state law matter that we can't handle because we don't have an attorney licensed in there, because of my practice area, I usually have attorneys that we can refer them to in their state that know, what they're talking about. Because unfortunately, one of the biggest problems we see is all criminal defense attorneys, they all say that they handle firearms law issues, even though they don't know the first thing about the firearms laws. Here in PA, our judges, district attorneys, criminal defense bar doesn't know the first thing about it. We've had situations where after the fact, we come to learn a judge told a client that, once you're done probation, it's good to go. You're fine. You don't have anything to worry about. You can get your guns back. So after probation, he goes to Cabela's, attempts to purchase, gets denied. Now he's being prosecuted by the state for making a false statement on the 4473 form. Luckily, the client told us the truth. We were able to get the transcript from that hearing where he's represented by his prior counsel. Sure enough, the judge on the record told him, you'll be good to go once it's done. So we're able to get that transcript, give it to the district attorney, and the charges get dismissed. But that doesn't change the fact that he's still a prohibited person as a result of that. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the major reasons I want to bring that up, because there are people out there that are going to constantly call themselves constitutional law, Second Amendment law. Well, all law is constitutional law, in generals. But people will say that they're more two-way related, but yet you have a conversation with them and you can tell that, they don't have a clue they're talking about. So I think it's nice to know that whether or not you can practice in their state or not, they can at least consult with you, and then you can maybe guide them towards someone in their state that could help them. So I think that's very, very good.
Just real quick, the other organization I'd highly recommend people can reach out to is Firearms Policy Coalition. Absolutely. I've been really impressed with their work recently. And just so everyone knows, name of full disclosure, they've, as I've already alluded to, they've funded a number of cases I've been involved in, but so has NRA and Gun Owners of America and some other organizations. But I've been really, really impressed with the litigation they're bringing across the U.S. And if you do contact them and need an attorney in a particular state, they do have a referral list and can, likely get you in contact with someone who's competent and knows what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, it was really good. Clover and I think Clover was there, but we were at the Brownells party at SHOT, and I was sitting with a Brandon. This was 2 years ago. I'm sorry, at the Circle Bar at SHOT Show, and I had a half an hour discussion with Brandon, and knowing where they were 2 years ago, primarily in California. I mean, that's kind of where they could only really, they had the funding for, and now where they've gone in just in a couple of years is really phenomenal. So yeah, Firearms Policy. What I love about them also, I put their website out there. And what I love about them is they make one of the best websites that you can take action against people in your laws and all that in your state. So go, if you haven't checked out their website, it's a phenomenal website. They actually will give you templates on how to write your congressmen or senators. So they really can literally hold your hand and walk you through the steps of at least contacting your elected representatives. So and phenomenal people. Clover, I know you had to step away, but you were back, and basically what we were talking about is if you are in your state, I asked him, could you contact him and he could at least refer a lawyer. Do you have anything at this point that you want to bring up for the chat or your own questions to Josh real quick? He might not be back. I thought he said he was back. He might not be back.
I am. I just had to get the mute off.
Yeah.
There's a good one out there with who is it? Roger out there. He says, good question. Is Josh drinking liberal tears?
I saw that.
So, I like it.
Up there.
I don't know. I don't know what roads we want to go down, but one of the things that I want to ask, because it's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and we had an opportunity legislatively to potentially do something and get suppressors off the NFA. And so when that opportunity was squandered, I'll say that way, because that's the nicest way to put it. Then, it got into more where I was looking into the legal avenue and, what would be the argument? What could be the pathway through the court system? So, can you talk a little bit about maybe what your thoughts are on maybe not just getting, not with just suppressors and the NFA, but short barrels and other things, dealing with the NFA and trying to roll that back through the court system? Or is that battle better fought through the legislative branch?
I think that battle is better fought through the legislative branch. I don't think it is likely that we will see the U.S. Supreme Court rule that machine guns are protected by the Second Amendment. I mean, you had Justice Scalia read into the Second Amendment reasonable restriction. I'm sorry, I don't see that anywhere in the Second Amendment. And
not those 27 words that I saw. Yeah.
The real issue I have, and this also goes for First Amendment jurisprudence as well, is that the court wants to impose new verbiage in the constitutional amendments and then apply levels of scrutiny. There's nothing in the Constitution saying, well, this right is something I really, deserve, or, I have a right to. And, depending on what the government's interest is, should dictate whether I really have that right. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. What our founding fathers included in our Constitution was an amendment process. If you don't like what the Constitution says, then you're free to petition your representatives to have the Constitution amended. Now, I think there's issues there as well, because I'm not so sure that another person can divest me of my inalienable rights. But I will at least acknowledge that there is an amendment process provided for in the Constitution whereby if you want to change something in the Constitution, that is the proper way in which to go about it. And I'll defend anyone's right. If you tell me you want to repeal the Second Amendment, again, I'm not so sure you can take away my inalienable, inviolate right, but I'll defend your right to petition your representatives consistent with the Constitution to amend the Constitution. I also really think it's interesting, and no one ever talks about this, how far we've come in such a short period of time. And what I mean by that is the 18th Amendment was passed, most people know it as prohibition. We banned alcohol consumption, use, possession, everything. And then, and that was to ban something that is not even specified in the Constitution. So in enacting the 18th Amendment, we understood that if we wanted to ban something for all citizens of the United States across the United States, we had to go through an amendment process. And then when we decided, that's not right for us, the 21st Amendment was passed to repeal prohibition, repeal the 18th Amendment. Where have we gone that we've lost this understanding that if we want to ban something that's not even specified in the Constitution, that we have to go through this process? How is it nowadays we ban things legislatively on, bills that our representatives can't even read and don't even read, and say, oh, well, let's pass it and then we'll figure out what it says? I mean, it's absolutely obscene.
It is. There was a great question out here from Georgia Trucker. Says, what types of felonies are the ones where you can have your rights restored?
So, to the surprise of most people, what federal law talks about is not misdemeanors or felonies. It's being convicted of a crime punishable by more than 1 year in jail. So federal law doesn't care if you don't spend a single night in jail. All it looks to is, were you convicted of a crime that could have been punished by more than 1 year in jail? Then, because of the Common Core education factor of our U.S. government, they had to define what constitutes a crime punishable by more than 1 year, and they excluded out any state law offense of a misdemeanor nature that could have been punished by 2 years or less. So everyone's completely confused at this point and has no idea what I just said. So let me try and explain it. Basically, if you are...
that's where everyone is. That's where I think everyone gets confused, is no one knows what the hell's going on. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you are convicted of a federal offense or a state law offense of a felony nature that could have been punished, doesn't mean it was, but could have been punished by more than 1 year in jail, you are federally prohibited from purchasing, possessing, utilizing firearms and ammunition. Okay? That means that 500-round brick of 22s is 500 separate federal felony counts, each one of which you could be sentenced to 10 years in jail, $250,000 in fines, forfeiture of any vessel or building that it's found under, and a whole bunch more of other fun stuff. In relation to a state law offense of a misdemeanor nature, if it could have been punished by more than 2 years in jail, then it's federally prohibiting in the same way. I can tell the listeners that, to my knowledge, there's only one state felony in the United States that doesn't meet the requirement. Apparently, Ohio has, and this comes from Attorney Derek DeBross there, who's a good friend of mine, has a domestic violence provision that it's graded as a felony, but the maximum is 1 year. So it doesn't trigger the more than 1 year requirement. So
I would have not have thought that a domestic violence would have been the one that would have been less than 2 years.
Well, here's the real crazy part. So since it's a felony, it doesn't fall under the Lautenberg Amendment, because that only prohibits people convicted of misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. Years ago, I had an interesting case in that regard. I actually had a law enforcement department contact me. They wanted to hire me as a consultant, and they said they had a problem. I said, what's that? They said, well, we have an officer who's up on domestic violence charges, and we basically need that officer to be able to continue possessing his firearm in duty. And I said, well, I'm sorry, although there is an exception under federal law that most people don't know about, that says basically if you're serving the U.S. government or state or local government, you can possess a firearm while you're in that official capacity. So you're a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, depending whether you're official.
Take uniform off and you can't do it,
Right. But it specifically excludes individuals who were convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence from that exception. So I said, well, they need to fight the charges successfully. They said, yeah, that's not a possibility. There's video evidence and already admitted to it. And I said, well, what exactly do you want me to do? They said, well, we came to you because we understand that you have a aptitude for thinking outside the box. And I said, well, gee, thanks. I said, how does your
video evidence here?
I said, how does your officer feel about pleading guilty to a felony? And they said, well, he's not charged with a felony. Why would he plead guilty to a felony? I said, well, if he pleads guilty to felony domestic violence, although he'll still be prohibited in his private life from purchasing and possessing firearms, the exemption would apply because he hasn't been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. And that officer ended up pleading guilty to a felony ag assault.
And kept his job.
Kept his job and his gun.
There you go. Midnight Ring Steve M, who's a friend of ours. He's a chef and a gun guy in Harrisburg. I wants to know about the fact that in PA you can carry I guess concealed with a permit, but you can't have it in open carry. You can't open carry with a permit, but you can't have it in a vehicle unless you have a permit. Anyone ever try to fight that to allow permitless open carry?
Not really. I'm actually preparing a case that will likely get filed once this pandemic is over, where we're going to challenge some of the restrictions. Because here in Pennsylvania, it's even far worse than that. We have draconian transportation laws that basically say if you don't have what here in Pennsylvania we refer to as a license to carry firearms, you can only go directly to and from very specific locations. So from your home to the range and back. if you go to the range and on your way back stop to buy a coffee, you just violated the act. And oh yeah, by the way, that's a misdemeanor of the first degree. That can be punished by up to 5 years in jail. So you'll federally be prohibited from ever being able to purchase and possess firearms and ammunition just because you stopped on your way home to pick up a coffee. So we're looking at challenging some of that. Also, the current case before the U.S. Supreme Court, the New York SERPA case, State Rifle Pistol Association, is involving a very similar issue. So it'll be interesting to see what the U.S. Supreme Court does there. It may have some application. But a tidbit for all the listeners, because I can't believe how many attorneys haven't picked up on this. Download a copy of DCB Heller and search the decision for the word pocket. You will find that the U.S. Supreme Court, in the opinion, said that the definition of bear arms includes having a firearm in one's pocket for purposes of armed defense. That's at the core of the Second Amendment. So
I never knew that. I knew that there was a thing that self-defense is included in the Second, but I never knew that pocket was included in that.
Yeah, search the Heller decision for the word pocket. You'll come right to it because it's only used once. Yeah. So I've argued the U.S. Supreme Court's already held that concealed carry is protected within the Second Amendment.
Absolutely. There's a question out here from G23. Do you know about the Wiper Accord company that helped restore felony? Have you ever heard of this company?
No, I assume it's Wipe Record Company.
Oh, it could be.
It looks a little weird altogether. Yeah. But I have not. I know there's a lot of entities out there that say that they'll get things expunged or felonies removed from your record. Each state's going to be different, and a lot of those are fly-by-night organizations. They're not really going to help do anything except take your money. Speak with an attorney who really knows, because like here in PA, generally speaking, we can't get someone expungement unless either they turn 70 years of age and haven't committed a crime in the past 10 years, or they've been dead for 3 years. Yes, that's what Pennsylvania law provides. So usually in those situations, we have to go the pardon route, and I've been very successful with getting a number of clients pardons, but that doesn't mean that's going to be true in your state. There may be other relief mechanisms available, or your expungement laws could be far more broad than those here in PA.
Yeah. C4 Defense, who is a law enforcement officer in North Carolina, good friend of ours, says, how about you just fire the guy who is convicted of domestic assault and get people with less liability? What are your thoughts on that? Or do you have
I wasn't retained for that purpose.
Fantastic.
I just did my job. They said they wanted an out-of-the-box, idea, way to solve their problem, so I gave them a solution.
And I think the interesting thing about that is from the story that the conversation that we were just privy to, the whole idea of the private life, the private rights to keep and bear arms were never brought up. It was this guy wants to keep his job, and you've figured out a way for this guy to keep his job. And obviously it was important enough for him to keep his job that maybe it was worthwhile to forego his rights as a citizen in a private life to keep that job. And so you did exactly what you were asked to do, which is interesting. I think that guy's got to be at least thankful that he is able to support his family still.
Well, and this kind of ties back to a couple of the prior questions. I had mentioned that I had 2 successes with Second Amendment as applied challenges in Keys and Yaks. And those, again, were cases where Keys was a Pennsylvania state trooper who was involuntarily committed while a trooper. And he, after that, was cleared by the Pennsylvania State Police psychiatrist, said he's fine for duty, had his duty weapons. He qualified in the top 10th of a percentile within all the PSP with all of his firearms. He's a phenomenal guy. And yet he was prohibited in his private life from purchasing or possessing a firearm. Similarly was Yaks, who he, as a juvenile, was involuntarily committed, comes out, joins the 82nd Airborne. He has everything under your imagination at his disposal while there, comes back stateside, then gets a job as a state correctional officer, has a firearm on his hip, goes to purchase a firearm for his personal protection, can't, because he's prohibited. And in both those cases, I was successful in getting the court to find that it violated their Second Amendment rights to prevent them from being able to possess firearms in their private life. But that also goes back to the question you asked me earlier about picking your plaintiffs. Because again, if I wasn't going to be successful with a Second Amendment as applied challenge in that scenario, there was no winning any case, because, you know, there you have someone who you can show legally possesses a firearm limitedly while in the course and scope of their duties, and there's no concern with it. Right. So, you know, just kind of tying all the things together.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And this is something that people, you know, whether you're listening now or later on, something you need to understand, that sometimes if you commit a crime, sometimes you're just going to have to live with it. You commit a crime. And as much as, you know, Josh or these other attorneys can think outside the box to get you as much help as they can, eventually it's going to come down to, even for that split second, you did something dumb. And there's just no coming back from that. I hate to be negative Nancy, but I'm assuming from your world is you're going to have people that you would really love to help. In the end game, you're just like, unfortunately, guys, I can't, I mean, you did this, you know, you were caught on video or whatever, and there's nothing I can do. That's what is something that I think is tough. I can only imagine what you go through, and you have to look at someone's family and go, as much as I'd love to help you, I just don't see a way out of this.
And the other problem that people need to be aware of is it tends to be very expensive. When you sue the U.S. government, as I kind of alluded to before, they have all the U.S. attorneys, DOJ attorneys, ATF, FBI attorneys that they want to throw at these cases. And there's meaning to the old adage, you're making a federal case out of this. Right. And it gets very expensive very fast. So definitely think about what you're doing before you do it to make sure it's worth it. But that being said, there are so many laws on the books that it is now an impossibility, I don't care who you are, to know all the laws that apply to you. I don't think there is a person alive that hasn't violated some provision of the tax code. And that doesn't mean that it's knowing. It's the fact that you can't possibly know it. The guy who wrote the code came up on charging for violating it, and his defense was, I didn't know that's what it said. I mean, when you write it, you could say, well, I don't know what it says. I mean, that's obscene. But that's the world we live in, and that is what would cause our founding fathers to roll over in their graves.
Yeah. Clover, do you have anything you want to bring up or ask real quick?
Well, for those out there that are in that situation that nobody can help them, I just want to throw this out there that I am an enchanted being and having access to the seventh dimension. That is time travel. So for a small fee, I can fix your past problems. Contact me at changemypast@clovertac.com. We'll get you taken care of, man. 100% satisfaction guarantee. But in all seriousness, my question gets back into, we're starting to see it seems like these compounded, I don't even know what you would call them, pieces of legislation where through the legislative process they have to be appealed or repealed rather by like line item. And so when you're dealing with a complex piece of legislation that's infringing on any right, but you know, for our purposes here, obviously it's the Second Amendment, how does those compounding pieces of legislation complicate the legal process that you have to go through?
Well, generally, for most of the challenges we bring, it doesn't play that big of a role, because either the whole bill gets struck down or the individual provision, depending on how, again, it depends if we're looking at state or federal law, how intertwined that provision is with the rest of the bill and the enacting statute. As to whether just that provision gets struck down or whether the whole thing gets struck down. And sometimes there are, unfortunately, very good provisions that we like to see in a bill, not necessarily related to firearms, but just societal protections in a bill that gets enacted that also has detrimental effects to our Second Amendment rights. And in challenging those detrimental aspects, the whole thing gets knocked out. And it's just one of those situations. But I believe that we're at a point in time where we need to repeal a lot of the laws that are on the books. I think it's gotten way out of control. And the idea that we can legislate ethics and morals is just a lost cause. You're never going to be able to legislate ethics and morals.
Yeah. Kind of transition a little bit into something that viewers might remember. I do remember it. A couple of years ago, this is the first time I'd ever heard your name. It was NRAM. And you went after the NRA board and basically quoted their own laws and bylaws to where they couldn't go into private session. How did that feel when you basically were able to tell the NRA in front of everyone, including themselves, that you are literally breaking your own bylaws? And from that point on, did that change maybe the trajectory of your kind of, I wouldn't say celebrity side of things, but did it bring you more interest and more noticeability in the two-way arena?
Obviously, it was something that was important to me. I did it because of the issues at stake, not for any other purpose. And when I did it, I wasn't expecting to have any, accolades or anything of that regard. In fact, I was expecting that there would be plenty of people that would be quite pissed off with me for not just towing the line and just accept. I did get some dirty looks afterwards, trust me.
I would imagine, I would imagine.
I did get a number of pats on the shoulder as well. And it really goes back to good governance. I mean, that's what bothered me. Prior to that, I served in the Pottstown Police Athletic League. I ended up becoming president, and we received a substantial amount of grants from an organization as a nonprofit. And one of the things they wanted was for a nonprofit organization, one of the schools that had a nonprofit division, to review things that we did. And one of the things I was changing were the bylaws. And I was putting in place a whole bunch of checks on the presidency. And the person comes in and they're reviewing the bylaws, and they say, let me understand this correctly. You want to amend the bylaws consistent with this? And I said, yes. And they said, you're the president currently. I said, yes. You understand you're putting all these checks in regarding the president's powers and that? I said, yes. They said,
yes.
Why? We don't see this. I said, it's not about me. I know how I will comport myself. It's about the next person and the person after that to make sure that these things remain in effect and that we ensure the good governance that needs to occur. And that's what was lacking with NRA, and still is. The transparency isn't there. When Brewster Law Firm is getting paid, millions of dollars, I can't even fathom how that small of a law firm that I think they have 3 attorneys and 10 paralegals can generate $1 million a month in fees, let alone
not a year, a month.
Yeah, let alone the 20 million that they're apparently generating. There's something wrong. They either know where the bodies are buried, or there's really malfeasance in the reviews of their billings and such like that. So there were a lot of issues like that that really caused me to stand up and fight. And, they were taken off guard. And it wasn't just me. I was there with Adam Kraut. He was running for the board as well. And Rob Hicks was there as well.
Rob was very vocal. Rob's a good friend of ours and very vocal. He usually is very vocal, but I just think it was interesting because that was the first time that I remember of someone at the annual meeting saying, hold on, guys, you're breaking your own bylaws here. And so when that happened, was there what was the reaction privately? Was there any thing from the NRA that happened after that? Did they come after you, or did they, not saying they threatened you or anything, but how did they respond to you after the fact? Did they respond to you at all?
Not really. I think they're smart enough to know not to come after me. That would be a huge mistake on their part. But nevertheless, we did have some requests into the Civil Rights Defense Fund for funding of litigation matters that all, got denied immediately after there. So, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I've had prior to that both grants and denials by the CRDF, so I can't say either way. But honestly, like I said, I didn't do it for any other purpose. I tend to think I was pretty well known before that, but maybe not. I don't know how many people know me because of the NRA event or not, but I've been told by a lot of people I don't have a good conception of how well known I am in the U.S. And, again, I do what I do because I love it.
I had heard your name before, probably through Adam or something. But I remember the first time like hearing, say, oh, yeah, I remember that guy. But that was the first time like I kind of put a face to the name and like, yeah, good for him. Good for him. And I think maybe it was Rob. Maybe it was Rob that was saying, about talking about you a little bit, because that was the first time that I said, okay, put a face to the name. And then you had the red flag several months ago, maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago, whatever. You had the red flag stuff going on in Pennsylvania that I think Sarah was there as well. And I don't know if both of you or one of you, did you ever get a chance to testify, or you did get in to testify?
Yeah, okay. I got to testify. And although Sarah didn't get an opportunity to testify verbally, I believe she did get an opportunity to submit in testimony to the Senate Judiciary Panel.
I don't know who this was. They sent in a text. It just says, why does Adam get all the vacation time? You should join him on a nice hike.
I wish. But again, going back to NRAM, I think it is important. It wasn't just something I did. I mean, it was with Adam. It was also with Frank Tate. Frank had prepared a formal motion that was being filed, and that we were fighting to keep the meeting open so that motion could be heard. And thankfully it did end up being heard. So, it's just important. There were a lot of cogs in that machine making sure that what happened occurred. We just wish more had occurred at that point in time. It's really unfortunate to see NRA where it's at currently, and yet they still want to support Wayne and not cut out the dead weight and, basically regroup, because it's a phenomenal organization and I'm a benefactor of it. I'm also a Charlton Heston member. I've supported NRA wholly, and, but I have issues with the way in which they're spending membership money, and things just don't make sense. And board members, historically have not been asking questions. Those limited ones that did were chastised for doing it and didn't speak out about it. And I am concerned about what we're going to see from New York, the New York litigation and such like that.
Right. Chef Boy over there says the second day the red flag laws were crazy. Now that was, I'm not mistaken, I think Sarah was live on YouTube and I was kind of watching it, keeping it up. I want to say like Moms Demand Action or someone was there trying to block you guys from getting anywhere cleared, and they made you stay back. And there was a point in time that I guess you guys weren't even sure if you were going to be able to get in time. Is that correct?
Yeah. Ceasefire PA was there, Moms Demand Action. And they thought they were cute and pulled a fast one, getting a permit to hold a rally so that they could prevent us from getting close. And they held the rally at the far point of where the chamber was, where the hearings were going to be held. So they thought they'd prevent us from being able to go in. What Capitol Security ended up doing is they closed the door that was near them because of the rally, locked it, and let us at the other door in. So we ended up filling the room before any of the...
It kind of backfired on them a little bit.
Yeah, but there were some situations, there were some Capitol Police that didn't treat our people properly. There was one person who was initially arrested. I voiced some concern in recording and filed a complaint over one of the officers' conduct because it was clearly out of line. But thankfully, I think everything got resolved without anyone having any type of records.
Now, Sarah out there said this, and I was thinking the exact same thing. It was, I mean, let's not be kind to these people, that was actually a pretty smart tactic. Had it worked, it would have been brilliant. Luckily, it didn't work, so it was nice. Clover, before we kind of start transitioning, I got some fun stuff I want to bring up to Josh, but do you have anything that you want to talk about or ask real quick?
No, I'm good. Let's roll.
All right. So we understand we like to have fun a little bit. We've talked a lot of politics. We talked a lot of law. This is the fun stuff. So we understand you've got a pretty nice collection of firearms. I don't want to have you to pick between your kids, but I want to ask a couple of questions. So the first question is what was the first gun that you personally bought? You can answer some of these. You don't have to. If you don't want to answer some of the questions, you don't have to.
That's okay. The first gun I bought was actually a SIG P226 in nickel. It was a special edition that they had done, and that was the first gun that I bought myself.
You still have it?
I do.
Nice. Let's see here. Of all the guns that you have, what's your favorite? Now, I said I'm going to have you pick between your kids, but if you can pick one of just the ones that you have, and you say, hey, you only get one to take with you, what would that be? So
we're not talking post samples that live at a friendly federal firearms licensee, right? We're talking ones I personally own.
You personally own, that you have in your possession that you can only take one. What would that one be?
Wow, that's holy hell, man.
It's brutal.
Well, I guess I probably got to say my baby that I'm probably most well known for owning, and that's my Beretta 93R. I own one of the only transferable Beretta 93Rs in the U.S., and I own the only one that is made of titanium in the world. So that
you're my hero. Yeah.
Well, anytime you want to shoot it, just let me know.
I'm in. People laugh at me. The 92 is my favorite handgun. And a lot of people think that's just crazy. I learned to shoot in the Marine Corps. I didn't shoot prior to joining the Marines. So the first handgun that I really ever would learn was on an M9. So people hate the 92. A lot of people do. He likes the 92. But for some reason, that 92 is just something that has sentimental value. Now, 93 is that would be a dream gun of mine. That would definitely, and that's going to kind of take me to the next question. Any gun in the world that you don't have, barring NFA's gone, it's a wild, wild west. What's your dream gun?
Minigun. I mean, come on. What else? Like,
you got more than minigun. Yeah.
You know.
The only one, and a minigun, 50 calibers are all great. The only one that has ever been answered that I thought, oh, shit, I didn't even think about that. There's two of them. Was a tank, because technically it's a weapon.
Yeah.
And you look at F-35 or something that has like Sidewinder missiles, but I can't fly, so it doesn't help me, you know?
So at one of our machine gun shoots, I guess it was 2 machine gun shoots ago, someone brought an Oerlikon. I had never seen it. It's an aircraft gun. It's a 20 millimeter machine gun. It's got 2 harnesses that come down behind it, and you sit in and shoot it. He had it on a trailer. Phenomenal thing. I mean, 20 millimeter full auto. I mean, can't get better than that.
That would be awesome.
A lot of people laugh because in my office on my back desk, I actually have a 20 millimeter lobby that's fully functional, registered, just in case, the black helicopter comes.
You never know. You never know. Right. Clover, do you have any fun questions that you might want to ask Josh?
Yeah, if I can get unmuted here.
You can do it.
Yeah, along the lines of firearms, just simply because it's my thing. What's the oldest that you own?
So in my office, I actually have a 1798 cane gun.
Oh, wow.
Gentleman's cane gun.
Yeah.
I love the unusual things. So I am a machine pistol whore. Those are my favorite things.
Wrong with that.
And I love the unusual gadget guns and things of that nature. I have a number of operational briefcases for like the MP5 K and as well the Max and that. I love the gadget guns and all the unusual stuff. So yeah, that always comes close to my heart. My other machine pistol that is a close second to my 93R is I actually own an experimental Colt 1911 that Colt manufactured during World War II at the request of the U.S. government, because what the U.S. government wanted Colt to do was develop conversion kits where they could send them out to the GIs on the field and convert all their 1911 sidearms into machine pistols. But World War II ended before Colt finalized the design. So I actually
had that gone through. That would have been amazing.
So they did also, they put a front grip on it. They welded multiple magazines together and made a secondary grip so you could hold it like this. They put a stock on it that comes on and off. Obviously not stuff they'd be able to do to the field deployed 1911s. But again, like I said, I love the unusual machine pistols and unusual gadget guns.
We got a couple questions from the chat. Midnight Range, he's a chef in Harrisburg, wants to know, you've got some awesome guns. Is your firm hiring any chefs?
Unfortunately, my father, that's his favorite thing to do. Although he's a lawyer and I'm fourth generation, his hobby's cooking. And my parents' house have a his and hers kitchen. And I joke, it looks like an F-16 crashed into the side of the house because of the exhaust vent in his kitchen. He's got a fully commercial kitchen, 20-quart mixer, jade range, salamander. I mean, the man's crazy when it comes to cooking.
All right, so I got some fun ones here. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Is a Slim Jim candy?
In what world? I mean, like, really, like.
These are arguments that go on. It's funny and all of that. It is hilarious. Yeah, but those are the two big ones: Slim Jim and candy, and our hot dog sandwiches. And Clover, you got anything else?
Absolutely. Is it a Reese's peanut butter cup or a Reese's peanut butter cup?
Oh boy,
it doesn't matter because I love either one. Yeah,
I think it's a Reese's.
How it's spelled? I think it's how it's spelled. That's how it's spelled. Left Twix or right Twix? Don't worry.
Both.
Yeah, exactly.
How am I taking
no to one of them? Right. All right. So we like to have a little fun with some of that stuff right there. Once again, guys, if you've been watching all along, it's been an amazing conversation. Josh, what I want you to do is I'm going to start putting some links out there for you for the consulting group and all that. But real quick, if you want to kind of tell people where they can find you, if they need some legal assistance, what you might be doing and all of that stuff, that people can maybe start following you maybe on social media if you want to. More importantly, if they need legal consulting, maybe they can get a hold of you there, but I'll put links out there while you're doing that.
Awesome. So yeah, if you're looking for us, we have the website firearmsindustryconsultinggroup.com for any firearms law related issues. The law firm is Civil Rights Defense Firm, which you can find at civilrightsdefensefirm.com. There we handle all the other constitutional issues that you may encounter. Again, I'm licensed in Pennsylvania and Maryland for state law issues and federal issues we do handle across the U.S. You can reach us on the phone at 888-202-9297. Again, that's 888-202-9297. You can also always reach me, Joshua, at civilrightsdefensefirm.com or info@civilrightsdefensefirm.com. We're on social media, so you can find Firearms Industry Consulting Group on Facebook, as well as we have a couple YouTube pages for federal and Pennsylvania firearms law matters. Although I'll be honest, I haven't done any videos real recently there. Also do have Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there. So yeah, that's the best ways to reach out. And like I said, pretty much if it involves a firearm, unless it's a patent issue, we handle it, including civil rights deprivation actions against both state government and federal government, usually referred to as 1983 actions or Bivens actions. And I love suing the government.
I love it. Clover, before we jump out, do you want to plug anything that you are doing or where they can find you as well?
Videos are dropping all the time. Everybody knows that. And clovertech.com to follow that stuff. Anything on social media, written reviews, video reviews, whatever it might be. And yeah, it was awesome chat. Really dug it. Nerded out a lot.
Yeah, it was one of those conversations that I like having these conversations. And a lot of times Clover and I talk on the phone. This is the kind of stuff that we talk about, even though that we're like armchair quarterbacks when it comes, we're not lawyers, but we try to keep up with as much as that stuff is. But I think it's important for people out there, especially right now, that if you're not, well versed in the law, especially state level, verse yourself, read a lot of stuff, what's going on, to make sure that, don't wait for something bad to happen to find out what you could have done. And if you need help, there are always attorneys out there that will help. Like I said, no matter where you are, if you need an attorney for Second Amendment issues, get a hold of Josh and he can at least point you in a direction. He's got to know someone in your state that he would trust, that he would get you in contact with. So guys, thank you so much for watching live. If you're watching in replay or listening in podcast form and you have a question for myself or Clover or Josh, please use that comment section below. Go check out Josh on all his social media. More importantly, utilize his law expertise when it comes to civil rights and especially the Second Amendment at the Firearms Industry Consulting Group. He could really save what could be the rest of your life when it comes to your rights. So once again, thank you so much, Josh, for coming on. And guys, thank you so much as always for watching and listening. We'll see you next week. Semper Fidelis.
My pleasure.